So we are at our final speaker of this evening. We had some great talk about mutations in mathematics and biology, and then just straight up mathematics. Now we're going to talk about dead people. So I'm very happy to announce Brian Waters from Foucault Leaders. Yep. With the presentation title, Dead Men Do Tell Tales, What Forensic Autopsies Can and Can't Tell Us. All right, take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Raymond. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I promise there will be no math equations in this presentation. Give you a break from that. Benjamin Franklin is said to have popularized the phrase, in this world, nothing is certain except death and taxes.
Is the audio recording?
Yes, it's on. So, how many people in this room have never paid taxes? I think probably everyone. How many people in this room have ever died? Should be nobody. If you follow me on Twitter at my2yen, by the way, you'll see my Twitter bio says, I see dead people. And then I add the tag literally, because I do. I literally see dead people. In the forensic medicine department at Fukuoka University, we do on average about 100 autopsies a year, forensic autopsies. So I do see dead people quite often. I always ask this question when I give a presentation to a crowd like this. Has anyone here ever seen a dead body in the wild, not at a funeral or at a wake?
In the wild.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so usually no one raises their hand, but if you've done search and rescue or if you've worked for the coroner's office like I have, then you've seen a lot. And
it's nothing like you see in the movies.
it's nothing like you see in the movies, that's for sure. But the point of comparing that with taxes is because everyone's paid taxes, but no one has seen, or hardly anyone has seen, a dead body in the wild. That's kind of a testament to the fact that we live in a first world country and that most of us are from first world countries, because we are very protected against seeing death on a daily basis. I think that's a good thing. But today we're going to talk a little bit about what autopsies are and why they're important. So first we're going to talk about what is an autopsy, and then what are the different types of autopsies, a little bit about the autopsy process, and then what can and can't they tell us, because they can't tell us everything. And then some myths about death and dying, I think everybody has probably heard. And then, yes, yeah?
Autopsies in Japanese.
It's on the next slide, my friend. And then I hope to get a lot of you guys' questions, because I think that's going to be the fun part of the talk. So Merriam-Webster says, an autopsy is an examination of a body after death to determine the cause of death or the character and extent of changes produced by disease. That's a fine definition of autopsy. I have no problem with that. Merriam-Webster did a fine job. But the Japanese word for autopsy is kaibo. Now, this kanji, the first one, kai, it has a lot of meanings, but one is solution. It also means understanding. It means unraveling, all right? And then this bo means divide. So if you think about an autopsy, what is it? You're dividing the human body up into its constituent parts so that you can solve a problem, or you can unravel a mystery, or you can understand something better. And that's a perfect definition of autopsy. Another word for autopsy is boken. Again, divide, right? And then this means examination or investigation. That's a perfect encapsulation. These two words are a perfect encapsulation of what autopsy. So Merriam-Webster is a decent job, but Japan has the goods. All right. I asked my wife, who's Japanese, if she understood this cartoon. She did not. I said, what do you mean? You don't say curiosity killed the cat in Japan? She goes, no. The only thing I know is that when a cat washes its face, it's going to rain. I was like, oh, interesting. And then we went on a bunch of different cat-related, like, did you know cats have 9 lives and that kind of thing. But so the point of a forensic autopsy is to determine 2 main things. One is the cause of death, and the other is the manner or mode of death. Now, most people understand what cause of death is. There can be many kinds of causes of death, and basically, a cause of death is anything that stops the heart from beating and the brain from thinking. Those are the 2 main things that if you don't have one or the other, you cannot live. So any of these things can do that, can start. For example, exsanguination or blood loss, right? You could be stabbed, you could be shot in the head. These things could lead to blood loss, and you will die from that. But as descriptive as that is, it doesn't tell you the whole story. Why? Why did they get shot in the head? And that's where the manner or mode comes in. So manners of mode are natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, and undetermined, okay? So, for example, let's just take homicide. The combination of the manner of mode and the cause of death, that is the goal of the forensic autopsy. We want to know those 2 combinations, right? So you can have a homicide by gunshot wound to the head, obviously, but you can also have a suicide by gunshot wound to the head. A person can turn the gun on themselves. Can you have an accidental death by gunshot wound to the head? Absolutely. Let's say someone is cleaning their gun, they forgot it's loaded, and they accidentally shoot themselves in the head. It's not a suicide. They didn't leave a suicide note. It's obviously not a homicide. Homicide means death by the hands of another. You cannot have a natural death by gunshot wound to the head. That's impossible. So, all right, so basically the combination of these 2 things are what we're looking for in a forensic autopsy. There are lots of different types of autopsies, not just a forensic autopsy that we've talked about here. Clinical autopsy is an autopsy that you would have at a hospital. For example, if a patient dies and the doctor wants to know, if they want to know the actual cause of death, or maybe the person was being treated for like cancer and they want to see exactly how far the cancer had spread, or maybe they were trying a new technique out and they wanted to find out if how that treatment was going. They would do a hospital autopsy. Recently, the virtual autopsy has become popular because of postmortem imaging has become so advanced technology-wise. You can find out a lot of information without cutting the body open by using X-rays, CT scans, MRIs. You can see down to the level of veins and arteries. You can see if there's any kind of blockage in the heart. But if you talk to the old school forensic pathologists, they'll tell you you can't tell anything unless you actually cut them open, get in there with your hands, see the colors, feel the textures. Okay? And then they have other autopsies: limited autopsy, psychological autopsy. This is an interesting one. A psychological autopsy, basically, like for example, if someone commits suicide, some investigators or doctors might get together and they might look at what the person was going through during that time. Does it make sense that they committed suicide? Did they recently lose their job? Did they have a bad breakup? If none of those things existed, then maybe they might look at it and say, was this really a suicide? Academic autopsy would be your medical school student doing an autopsy, a dissection, to learn about the morphology of the body. And then recently, private autopsies are becoming more popular. That's like if a loved one passes away, you pay money to a doctor to have an autopsy, either for a second opinion, or maybe you want to see if there are any kind of genetic diseases that you might need to worry about in the future, if you're like related to the person. It looks a lot like him, but he would never have a tag on his toe like that. The toe tag. The toe tag is a real thing. It is an actual thing. I used to work at the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office. We used toe tags there. And why do you think they put the tag on the toe? Can you guess? Who here does not have a toe? Everyone at least has one toe? So everyone has a toe. Also, the toes, if you think about it, they're kind of sturdy. Like they don't move around a lot. And they have a neck to it, right? You got the big toe and then the joint. That's a perfect place to tie a little piece of string on it with a tag on there. It's not going to come off. If you tie it on the finger, it could come off. If you put it around the neck, like you know, the military uses dog tags and stuff, that could come off. It flops all over the place. Toe tag is out of the way. It's a perfect place for that. Some tools of the trade. Always need a nice sharp scalpel to do the fine incisions. Rib shears, because you got to get to those organs, so you have to remove the rib cage. When I worked at Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, they had just a pair of like gardener shears. So they were like, cha, cha. Then heavy-duty autopsy saw to get at the cranium. The cranium is very thick. And then this is a cool poster. I was like, I want one of these for like my bedroom with all these old school like forceps and scissors and syringes and knives. My professor, he uses a big just like just a hocho, a knife that he bought in Germany because he was studying there, and that's what he uses during the autopsy.
What is it, a hocho for?
It's for autopsies, yes, yeah, it's especially for it. Or I guess you could use it for any kind of, if you worked at the butcher, you could probably. That would be surprising, wouldn't it? We're going to talk about if it's possible to be autopsy while you're alive in a minute. All right, so at Fukuoka University, we're going to talk a little bit about the process of doing an autopsy. We start at the head and go to the toe and then left to right. That's kind of the normal thing. But the first thing is the external examination. Before you make any cuts, you want to take a look, a good look all over the body. You want to look for obviously general appearance, age, race, height, all that kind of stuff. You want to make sure that the person that you're autopsying is actually the person that you're supposed to be autopsying. Also, if there are any kind of identifying marks, tattoos, scars. I've seen some pretty impressive tattoos here in Fukuoka from Yakuza who have come across our table. Then postmortem changes. Rigor mortis is the stiffening of the body. Livor mortis is the discoloration. When the blood starts to pool in the body, you get the nice purplish red color. And then decomposition. As soon as you start to decompose a little bit, you start to turn green, greenish blue, and then brown. And then external injuries, of course, are important. You're going to look for bruises and wounds and cuts and knives and everything. Now, after you finish the external examination, you want to make the first cut. Can anyone guess what that first incision is called? No guesses. It's called the Y incision. And the reason is because it looks like a Y. Now, that's what most places use. You want to do an efficient job to get at the internal organs. So it very literally looks like a Y. At Fukuoka University, we use a modified Y. It doesn't look much like a Y. But we really need to get into all of the organs and see them clearly. So basically, these cuts are made here. Then the skin is flapped back. And then you get at the rib cage and start getting into the organs.
So is that modification used in more places now, just sort of Fukuoka University?
I think every place is different.
Okay.
Yeah, every place is different. When I was researching this, because all I knew was the Y and this modified Y, there's also an I incision. A lot of places use the I just because it's the least amount that you have to sew up at the end, so it goes from here all the way down here straight, just a straight I. That was the first time I had heard of that. Okay. This is my favorite one, the telltale duodenum. That one kills me every time. Anyway, if you don't know Edgar Allan Poe, The Telltale Heart is the name of the book. All right, so once you get the Y incision and you flap the skin back, and there'll be a rib cage here, so you have to get rid of that with the shears. And take that. The rib cage, the ribs are connected by the sternum, so you'll cut those, and then remove that. This would be skin out here, you can't see, okay? And then we get into the internal organs, okay? So for a forensic autopsy, you want to examine every organ in the whole body cavity, okay? So each organ is removed, each organ is examined, is weighed, is measured, and then the doctor will examine it very closely and remark on any kind of unusual things that are going on around with it. Okay, I'm not going to quiz you guys on all the different organs, but basically after the doctor has finished looking at them, and maybe he takes a section for microscopy, which is going to be used later. Maybe he'll take a little piece for toxicology, which will be used later. Then what do you think happens with all the organs once he's done with them? They're basically put into a big black plastic bag, like a trash bag, like a Glad bag, and then put back into the abdominal cavity, just like that. And then he'll put the rib cage back on, fold the skin back up, sew it up, and then that's the way it'll go to the mortuary or whoever gets it next.
The rib cage isn't glued on, it's just like placed on top?
Yeah, it's just placed on top, yeah. There's no glue. Get some Elmer's in there.
Hot glue on the rib cage right now.
Also, while you have the body open, you're going to want to, like when the organs are removed, it's basically completely empty in there. You can get a good look at the spinal cord. You'll also, the bladder, which I don't know if that's in this picture. The bladder is not in this picture. Of course, you might have some urine in there. You want to take that for toxicology. Blood from the heart you'll take for toxicology. Also, blood from a peripheral vein, which usually is in the femoral area or maybe in the jugular area, okay? So that is good. That'll be a good comparison between the two types of two types of blood. Okay, so there are only two organs that aren't placed back into the body after it's been examined. And what do you think those two organs are? They're the most two important organs.
Heart and brain.
Heart and brain. Who said that? Great. The heart and the brain. And just like I said earlier, the reason is because without these are the most important things to look at because these are the most directly related to life or death, right? If the heart stops pumping, then there's not going to be oxygen that's going to get to the brain, and the brain's not going to be able to do its thinking, and it's not going to be able to tell the heart to pump. It's like a cycle, right? And so if one of these stops, then that's going to stop your life. And so the doctor spends a lot of time looking at these two organs very carefully, and oftentimes, many times, one of these two organs are the cause of death. Heart attack, maybe an aneurysm, something like that, okay? Other parts of the forensic laboratory that are important, histopathology, so you want to take those slices of tissue, put them on a slide, stain them, look at them under the microscope. It'll give you a good look at the cells, see if there's any changes in the cells, any kind of disease that's going on in there, any kind of wounds or anything there. My bailiwick is toxicology, that's what I do. So I examine the blood and tissue samples for presence of poisons or drugs. And then last but certainly not least is DNA for first and foremost for personal identification. And then other things. We don't do paternity testing, but we do do a lot of things with genetic markers for disease and that kind of thing. I hope that DNA helix is in the right direction.
The first thing I looked at.
All right. I'm over 20 minutes. I'm approaching 20 minutes, but I think it's okay if I go a little bit over. Yeah. So this slide is kind of a red herring. And the reason is because we can go over each one of these, but I'll go ahead and tell you that the answer is yes and no. It depends, right? The autopsy can tell us a lot of things. There are a lot of things that it can't tell us. Let's just take what, for example? What kind of weapon was used? Well, obviously, if you have a stab wound, you can look at the wound. You could measure it, the width. You can measure the depth. If you use like a rod, you can see how far it goes in. And if you have a weapon, a suspect weapon, you can kind of say, yeah, that makes kind of sense. It looks like it may have caused this wound. But you can't say for sure, not 100%. So that's kind of a triangle, right? It's not a maru or a batsu, right? Same thing with when. When exactly did the person die? Very difficult to tell. You can look at changes in body temperature. That's what a lot of people use. Those formulas are kind of off. It really depends on the atmosphere. Is it a cold day? Is it a hot day? Are they indoors or outdoors? And so you might get a good idea, but it's not going to tell you exactly. I mean, like at the autopsy, of course, if you do DNA later, you can tell, for example, who the person was. But at the autopsy, you can just take a look at their driver's license photo and say, oh, it kind of looks like them. But as you know, as Dave said earlier, like a lot of times they don't look like their photo at all after death. All right. The only thing on this list that really you cannot tell at all from an autopsy is why. Why did this person take their own life? Why did the person target them for murder? That answer has to be done through the investigation. All right? And so this slide leads perfectly into my next slide, which is the CSI effect. Has anyone ever heard of this? The CSI effect? Okay, Raymond has. Of course you have, Raymond. If you're not familiar with CSI, it's a popular television show in America. It stands for Crime Scene Investigation. This is the Vegas team. And if you notice, they're all beautiful and they're dressed very well and everything in the background is shiny and new. This is total fiction. Okay? The reality is much less glamorous. Just a couple of nerds with test tubes. But the CSI effect is an actual phenomenon. Because of the popularity of these type of shows, everyday people who aren't scientists, people who don't know anything about forensics, they think they know a lot because they watch these shows. And so you get to a court case and you get a jury, and the jury is listening to the evidence, and they're like, wait a minute, there's no DNA evidence? Well then, how can we convict? Their standards are becoming way too high because they think they know. Now this is the exact opposite problem from the OJ problem, which was, I think one of the jurors said, I don't know anything about no DNA, and that is a big problem too. So the point is, like I said in the previous slide, it is a gray area. A lot of things can be told, a lot of things cannot be told, but the main point is you have to be effective at explaining to the jury exactly what evidence that you have, exactly what it means, and what you can and can't say about it. All right, so let's go to some common myths about death and dying. Oops. Hair and nail growth. A lot of people have heard that when you die, your hair and your nails keep growing. That is a myth. When you die, your heart stops beating, the blood stops flowing, and there's no physiological activity going on at all. The reason that people think that hair and nails grow is because as you start to decompose, the skin and the scalp start to retract a little bit and shrink, and it gives the appearance that, oh, it looks like their nails are a little bit longer than they are in this picture right here. Moving, twitching, and noises. Okay, we've all seen movies where the dead body just jumps in the air all of a sudden. This might happen right after death because there's still some electrical impulses going from the brain into the muscles, and you might have some twitching or maybe that last guttural death rattle. But after a few minutes, this will not happen. If you're dead, if your heart has stopped and your brain has stopped, you will stop moving, you will stop making noises. The only exception is, as you start to decompose, your body will start to form gases in your different cavities, and if you move the body around and those gases escape, you might get some noises that way, right? Rigor mortis. A lot of people don't really understand rigor mortis. Rigor mortis is the stiffening of the muscles after you die. It doesn't happen immediately, okay? When you die, there's usually a good maybe 0 to 24 hours before you actually start to stiffen. And they stiffen in place. It's not like they move like this or anything like that. They stiffen in place. And then after about 48 hours, that subsides and goes away. So it's a good sign of the date of death or the time of death. Because if you come across the body and you're not sure if it's been like 12 hours or 24 hours, and you feel the body and they're completely free of rigor, meaning they're free moving, then that probably means that it's been over 48 hours that they've been dead. But if you come across the body and they're completely rigid, and you move them and it's hard to move them, then that's probably, they're right in the middle of rigor, so that's probably between, say, 12 and 48 hours that they've been dead.
Is that affected by the ambient temperature?
No, it's not. So rigor is something that has to do with calcium and the way that muscles move and stuff like that. It has nothing to do with how cold it is or how warm it is. You might get a body that's frozen, and that will be hard. But that has nothing to do with rigor. All right, is it possible to be autopsied alive? How many people think yes? Have you heard those stories in the news where someone wakes up on the autopsy table or buried alive or whatever?
I mean, there was that news just recently, like from Chile.
Right. Yes.
I think she died like a couple of days later. Actually.
Right. She was like in the coffin or something and then sat up. Okay, the reason why it's impossible to be autopsied alive is because while you're alive, what is happening? Your heart is beating, right? So blood is flowing. So as soon as the doctor puts the scalpel to skin, you're going to get a flow of blood outside of that cut. Now when you're dead, when your heart has completely stopped beating, there's not going to be any flow of blood. There might be blood, like when you open up the body and there are cavities that are filled with blood, and then you say puncture a lung or something and it starts to spill out. But there's not going to be any spurting. There's not going to be any flow of blood. So if I'm a doctor and I'm on an autopsy table and I make that first cut and some blood starts to flow out, I know to stop immediately and start checking for a pulse and, that kind of thing. Exactly. Exactly. And apologize profusely. All right. Thank you very much. And this is one of my favorites. I love Gary Larson. That's how entomologists pass away, right? Curled up like a bug. All right. Any questions, please? Anything at all? 日本語でもいいですよ。はい。
So, what is the best time for autopsy? So, the earlier the better?
Yes, good question. When is the best time for an autopsy? Obviously, as soon as you die, as your heart stops beating and your brain stops thinking, you start to degrade, right? You start to decompose. So, from a forensic scientist point of view, you want the body as pristine as it can possibly be without any kind of degradation. You want to see everything, because that is the closest condition to the time of death, and that's what you want to see, right?
The sooner the better.
The sooner the better. And especially for me as a toxicologist, those are the samples that I want. That blood sample right as soon as they pass away, because that is the closest idea of what was in their blood at the time that they died.
Do you have any idea of the current condition in Japan about autopsy?
Yes.
We sometimes the journalists say that we are behind the world trend.
Yes. Japan is behind.
Really?
Yeah, it is because, okay, so let me just give you an idea. Where I worked before I came to Fukuoka University, I worked in Los Angeles at Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, and we did 10,000 autopsies a year. 10,000 autopsies just for the county of Los Angeles, okay? And at Fukuoka University, we do about 100 a year. Now, Fukuoka University does autopsies on behalf of Fukuoka Prefectural Police Department, and there are other universities that also do autopsies, Kyushu University, Sangyo Ika Daigaku, Kurume Daigaku. So we all share the autopsy burden, but still, the total number of autopsies between the four universities is probably like 450 or 500 per year. So it's not a lot. And so the percentage of autopsies compared to the people who died in Los Angeles County was about 25%. 25% of the people who died in Los Angeles County went on to autopsies at the coroner's office, right? In Japan, the national average is about 10%. Now, there are some countries that autopsy 100% of their deaths. Some of the northern European countries, like I think Finland and maybe Sweden or something like that.
Why is that?
Yeah, what are the deciding factors on what deserves an autopsy and what doesn't?
That's a great question. So for example, let's take Los Angeles. Los Angeles, the definition was any sudden, unusual, or unexpected death. So including suicides, including car accidents, those are unexpected. And of course, any homicide. But a majority of them were just people who died in their homes by themselves, and there's really no reason why they should have died. They were relatively young. There's no signs of disease, that kind of thing. Those get the autopsies.
The family wants some closure.
Right, exactly. In Japan, the police department governs all of that, right? They have all of the authority on that. So they decide, and they have to, and it's not their fault. I mean, they have to manage their resources, right?
They have a criteria they have to follow.
Exactly. And so if a police officer finds a person hanging in their house with all the doors locked and a suicide note, I mean, they're probably not going to autopsy that. The cause of death is clear. There's a note. All the doors are locked. That kind of thing.
But in LA it would be?
In LA it would be, absolutely. Yeah. And the criteria is different anywhere you go. In America, the law enforcement system, the police system, and the medical examiner system are separate, and they're separate on purpose because you want to have a check and a balance. Yeah. Sometimes the cops say, this is obviously a suicide, but the coroner says, no, this is a homicide, and they kind of battle.
Yeah.
In Japan, the police, they are in charge of everything. And so even if the medical examiner, the person who does the autopsy, says, oh, I really think this is probably a homicide, you might want to look more at the investigation, the police have the final say. And I'm not saying that the police aren't doing a good job and they're corrupt or anything, but obviously they could make a mistake, and it's good to have that kind of check and balance, I think. But the main problem is there's just not enough autopsy doctors. Nobody wants to go into this field. It's disgusting. So, and there's...
CSI Tokyo.
Right, exactly.
Very thin plot, probably. Not a lot of episodes.
Well, Tokyo is a different animal, from the rest of Japan. Fukuoka has its fair share of, I've seen some... Right.
So I have a question.
Wait, let's have other people. You got a question?
I was just going to, a bit of a lighter track maybe. What would be the perfect murder? I read a lot of fiction and mystery books, and there's always people, they were frozen, they were in a locked room. So what would your opinion of like a perfect, untraceable, unsolvable?
Here, let me get my memo book. Where is it?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, and there are actually a lot of good answers for that. The reason people get caught is because they have a relationship with the person that they killed. There's always something to trace. So,
No trace.
If there's no trace, the perfect murder is a perfect stranger going up to another perfect stranger in a dark alley and shooting them with a gun that was untraceable, and then just walking away because there's no way to connect. Why would the person do that as long as there were no cameras or anything like that, right?
Yeah, you can do it.
There you go.
Right, but let me just say this. Criminals are pretty dumb. And they think that they're going to get one away, but, science always wins out.
With a straight head if you're going to kill someone.
Right.
I have a question about the CSI effect.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is a gap people's expectation for autopsy, and how do you cover the gap of the expectation and the reality?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when people watch shows like CSI, especially shows that really have a lot of emotion, and they make you think, oh, I saw this on an episode. I know exactly how this is supposed to go down. Yeah, exactly. So it really is important for the scientists to be able to communicate very effectively with the non-scientists and be able to say exactly, this is what this means, especially, for example, with the DNA. Oh, this is great for you math people. Statistics, right? Statistical probability. All right, what are the chances? What are the chances that this DNA and this other DNA here, what are the probability that they're the same or that they are different? The layperson doesn't understand that. Even if you say like 1 in a million, is that a lot? What if you say 1 in 1,000? Is that a lot? And so people don't know how to really understand that. So it really takes a good communicator that's able to take their difficult concepts and really explain it so that the person understands, which is exactly why it's great that you guys are here and that you're doing these presentations trying to explain these incredibly hard math problems and stuff to us people who don't understand them really. That's why we do it. That's what your job is, right, Raymond?
Wait, oh shit, it is.
One more question.
Yeah.
Can we go in the other side?
Okay, you're north side.
Well, so when you start autopsy, do you have a hypothesis or no hypothesis about the death?
Well, it's a great question. For me, as a toxicologist, I want to know the least about the case as possible, and at least in the beginning. And the reason is because I want to come into it fresh so that I can leave no stone unturned. I want to look for every possibility. I want to try to check for this type of drug or this type of drug or this type of drug. If, for example, if the police say, oh, this person had coccinelle in their room, so maybe it's coccinelle, and then I find it, then maybe I might go, oh, I'm just looking at coccinelle, that's all I'm looking at. Methamphetamine, by the way, if you don't know what coccinelle is. And then I forget about this other stuff, right? But a very important part of the job, like I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not the one actually doing the autopsies. Those doctors have to talk with the police department and communicate with them very carefully, right? Because they have to understand exactly what was going on around the time of death, who else was involved, where was it found exactly, crime scene photos, everything, before they even start the autopsy. Because they definitely need, because there's just so much stuff in a human body to look at, they really need to know where to start and get some clues for it, right? We don't have 24 hours for everybody to do an autopsy or 8 hours. The typical autopsy at Fukuoka University, if it's just a run-of-the-mill, unidentified body, takes about 2.5 to 3 hours, okay? And that's with one doctor who's doing the cutting. We have an autopsy technician, maybe another support doctor, and then I'm in the room taking pictures and taking samples, and then a lot of police department people in the room that are helping out and taking notes, and maybe 2.5, 3 hours, okay? We had an autopsy this morning. It started at 9. I think I was on the train back home at about 1:30, okay? It was a drowning, so. Yeah, so it really depends. It depends on the type of case and also the doctor's personality. Does he want to know a lot, or does he want to try and figure it out for himself?
Last question.
So how do we get from Miami Vice to CSI Miami? Like in the 80s we had like all these action shows. There was a couple of hospital shows, and then there was like mid-90s this boom in these CSI shows.
That's true. Probably.
What's up with that?
Yeah. Well, I think I think people stopped using cocaine.
Yeah, there you go. Good answer. Yeah.
And they started doing other drugs that required CSI.
He's got a nosebleed.
That's just That's a good question for like a Hollywood exec, not for me. James, did you want?
Yeah. So at what point in decay does it no longer go to the coroner? Like if you just have skeletal remains.
Everything.
Even if only skeletal remains are present, it goes to you guys.
If you think about it, let's say we had a set of bones here on the table.
Yeah.
What do you think we'd be looking for?
Who?
Who? Yeah, we want to know who it is, right? And so, what about a skeleton's bones can tell us who that is?
Well, you could tell the sex, male or female. You could
Right.
potentially tell if they're what race, potentially. I suppose.
Exactly. So, James, you know all about this. So, the size of the bones, the length of the bones, that's a good indicator of how tall they were, right? How long is their femur, right? The femur is the big Nite Kyushu, right? The length of the femur, that's a good indication of how tall they were. Now, of course there are tall women, and of course there are short men, but there is an overlapping curve, right? You have very tall men, we have very short women, and then everything in between. But you can kind of get an idea, right? Also, the hip shape, the shape. Certain bones are shaped in different shapes for men and for women, right? Exactly. What is something that women do that men cannot do that would affect the shape of their hip bones? They give birth, exactly. And so that's going to change the angle of the bones. I mean, just out of necessity. Also, the skull. I mean, if you look at men's skulls on average, everything is on average, right? If you look at a men's skull versus a woman's skull, men typically have sharper jaw lines, right? They have they have a stronger brow ridge, right? All those type of things. They typically have longer foreheads and more straight up foreheads than women. So there's a lot of things you can tell just by looking at the bones. Also, if you find a bone that has, say, like a wound in it, like say a knife mark or some kind of tool mark, that'll give you another good indication of maybe how they died, or at least what happened to them after they did die. Maybe they were, chopped up into pieces or something like that and scattered about, and you can kind of tell that from the bones as well. So you can tell a lot from bones. So yes, we get a lot of bones, and
So I was just curious about the distinction between the States and Japan, because I know in the States a lot of times they'll work with forensic anthropologists for universities, as opposed to going through directly to coroner's offices.
Well,
maybe I'm mistaken about that.
I'm not sure about other places in the U.S., but in Los Angeles, even bones, if they're human bones, the coroner's office will respond. Right?
Okay.
We will respond. The coroner's office will respond. A coroner investigator will go to the scene. They'll make the distinction, because sometimes they're not human bones. Sometimes they're animal bones, and so you say, no, this is a dog bone or whatever. But if they're human bones, the coroner's office will come, and we have a forensic anthropologist on call.
Okay.
From a local university.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
Is that in Japan as well? There's a forensic anthropologist on call. Is that?
Well, the forensic. Not all of it, but a lot of forensic medicine and these investigation of dead bodies and bones goes through the university anyway.
Oh, okay.
Right? And so you're talking about, there are obviously people, forensic medical doctors in Japan who are experts in bone analysis, yeah. But most any, forensic pathologist, has studied about bones and knows enough about it in order to, make those kind of decisions themselves. So we do have a lot of bones. And we do have a lot of, especially in the mid to late summer months, we do have a lot of decomposing bodies. Someone who lives alone and maybe they're not seen for a few weeks in the hot summer and they don't have the air conditioner on. And that's all it takes. So, all right, I've gone way over 30 minutes.
Anthropologists in Japan?
Are there?
Here.
Yes.
Let me close up and you can ask me questions. All right. Well, thank you very much, Brian. And that closes off Nite Kyushu number 8.